Oh, hi there! This isn't the intro I originally recorded for this video, but I decided that was boring. So here I am, in a penguin onesie, under my Christmas tree with hot cocoa. Much more festive. This is empty. Somebody give me props department! Now, you may notice, there's no presents under this tree. That's because my presents and this YouTube channel is the real gift this season. Speaking of Christmas, just like when you re-gift, just like when Ebenezer Scrooge revisited his Christmas past, we'll be revisiting a project of the past. Now, I started on this cape about 2 years ago with fabric from the clearance section of Joann's and a pattern for Wonder Woman's cape. Don't worry, she said I could borrow it. The photo shoot I had originally made this cape for fell through, and I was working full time, so I couldn't really justify the effort. Or, I just didn't want to. But I'd say I have 20% more knowledge now and 100% less jobs, so why not? Your girl needs a cape. As you can see, we have some stitching going along here where the lining and cape are connected, with the bottom hem still being open, and the neckline as well. And the original pattern did not come with a hood, but I do have the intention to go in and add one to this cloak. Now, I had already cut out the trim pieces, which should have been self-explanatory, except here's where I was baffled. This says cut 2 of fabric. There's another piece that says cut 2 of interfacing. I, however, have 4 fabric, no interfacing, and just based off this pattern, 2 of these is not long enough to go around the bottom of the cape. And if you look at this diagram here where it shows you how you can lay out your pieces, you can see that this pattern piece was originally much longer than the one I have. And then I noticed on this piece here, pin markings right here on the edge. See that? So what I'm assuming is that this was all one long pattern piece once upon a time, and that I had a limited amount of fabric, which I think is proven true by the fact that I've not been able to find any of this anywhere in my fabric stash. So what I did was cut the pattern piece in half, and so what I have here is the entire band. These 4 pieces need to be sewn together instead of just 2 pieces. Which also makes sense why these were cut seemingly in the wrong direction, because I'm assuming I just didn't have a lot of fabric, so I just sort of cut them all the same way with the fabric doubled up. I'm going to go ahead and stop myself right there. I was really looking forward to editing this video until I discovered it's just a bunch of close-up footage of green fabric being fed through a sewing machine that all look exactly alike. And if that wasn't compelling enough, there's also this lengthy footage of sewing instructions that I didn't end up following. Really great stuff. And there's the self-realization that I talk really slow on camera. I would like to blame this on me being Southern, but really it's because my brain likes to think 20 thoughts at once or none at all, which means the connection from my mouth to my brain sorta sounds like this. Anyway, this whole clip is in here just for me to say that the directions wanted me to top stitch the trim, but I decided not to do that because that sounded ugly. The first step was to seam rip out the stitches I had sewn down the front of the cape, because the new plan was to instead stitch around the bottom once the trim was placed. That way I could fold it inside out and have a nice clean edge on the bottom. Once that was done, I pinned the bottom trim pieces together so they could be stitched into one long strip to fit around the bottom of the cape. When sewing, it always seems like ironing is the next step. Get it? Because I'm ironing my seams. So I'm going to start from the center back seam and start pinning it around. And because of the fabric and how I cut it, there is a little bit of stretch in this direction. So I'm hoping that I can actually pin it this way and stitch along here. That way I can fold it and you don't see any top stitching, and I also won't have any weird creasing going on. So that's the plan. So I'm going to mark out where it is now and then use that line that I mark to pin this along that line.
Then I proceeded to do exactly what I explained I was going to do. So in the meantime, may I entertain you with some interesting Christmas facts? Well, I don't actually know any. Except I think I heard about this like creepy horse skeleton in some country that comes to your house in the middle of the night and like sings you songs, I think. Oh, and one time in school, my sister did a Christmas project about a log that poops out candy if you hit it with a stick. Now, at this point in the process, it's very important that if your machine isn't working, you check and make sure it's plugged in. A Christmas fact I do know is that the shape of a candy cane is supposed to represent a shepherd's hook, but I like to think it's a J for Jesus. She's still talking. Time to iron again and get a nice clean seam.
The trim attachment method worked exactly as I had hoped, so I'm very excited about that. As you can see, it's got a nice curve to it, but there's no top stitching at all, and it's still hanging nice and flat. But now that I know this works, I'm going to go ahead, attach the second half, and then that's really the hard part done. The rest of it should just fall together from here.
Oh look, it's me again, and with a great new hair color. Let's listen in and see what I have to say.
I wasn't feeling the greatest, so I didn't set up the camera, but I did continue to work on the cloak. I finished attaching the lining to the bottom. I also went in and I understitched the lining. That way, as it hangs, we make sure that we don't see any of the lining from underneath our beautiful gold edging here. The next step is to attach the band here in the front and then do the, what's this called? Not the like cloak. The hood, which you will be included on all of that. Don't worry. I have this pinned here. I went in and I interfaced it. I want it to be stiff because I have this decorative hook I want to be able to use. And I don't want it to be like pulling weird on the fabric, so I figured some stiffening was nice. Alright, so let's stitch this down and keep trucking along.
Oh god, the finger guns. They're so awkward. And then I even make a reference to how I just did finger guns, which is just like even more cringe. Now stitch away using your sewing machine or your hands, but probably not your butt or your teeth, though many methods are viable. Once your trim is sewn on, the next step is to fold it over and iron it flat, and then you're going to pin the trim down with the seam allowance folded under, and you want to pin it just past the seam you just stitched. And here's myself from the past to explain why.
I think what I'm going to do is just stitch in the ditch, which means that on the machine you'll stitch right here in the crack of this seam where these two fabrics meet, and I'll use green on top, black on the bottom, so you won't really notice this stitch at all from the top side because it'll be hidden in the ditch, but it will just catch this here on the back side. And since I have it already ironed and folded under and right up against the seam, it should be pretty unnoticeable on this side as well. So, yes.
Oh look, finger guns again. What a fun little character trait. Now, I know the term stitch in the ditch can be confusing, but you're not actually required to do this while sitting in a ravine on the side of the road.
Alright, ate lunch, ready to get back to work. I have this pattern that I found, because obviously the Wonder Woman cloak pattern that I used did not come with a hood. It has some hoods, but I'm a little skeptical. I really hate like small, tight hoods. I wanted to have lots of extra fabric, be really like billowy. Start off by finding one of those patterns, cutting them out, making some adjustments, and just sort of play around with mock-ups for a little while until I get something I'm happy with.
Quiz time. How will Victoria end this segment? A, the classic double thumbs up, or B, her go-to finger guns? And the answer is this awkward dance thing. I sorted through the pattern looking for the hood piece. Oh, and oh look, what's this? An old MVP card. I laid the pattern out on my fabric and pinned it using pins, traced it using tracing chalk, and cut it out using scissors. Wow, what a professional. Even though the hood and the cape were from different patterns, I wasn't worried about them fitting together because the hood allowed for darts on either side, which meant I could adjust the size of the darts to fit the length of the neckline. Once I had it pinned together, I tried it on and discovered either these pattern makers know exactly what they're doing or my head's just really tiny, because I thought the hood had plenty of extra room and was great as is. This meant I could get on to stitching and celebrating a birthday. I turned a certain age throughout the filming of this video. I'll say it rhymes with flirty, as in flirting with danger. Danger of not ever finishing this video on time. I did the exact same thing for the outer fabric as I did for the lining, just pinning, stitching along the outside, and sewing the darts in place. Next step was to use the trim fabric to make giant bias tape. You do this by folding in the seam allowance on each side of your strip of fabric, and once you iron that into place, fold it in half and iron again, allowing one edge to just stick out slightly farther than the other. With wrong sides together, stitch your lining and outer fabric for the hood. You don't have to worry about flipping this inside out as the seam will get hidden by the trim. Speaking of trim, go ahead and pin that bad boy on. You're gonna want to start in the center and pin just beyond the stitch we just made so that it's nice and hidden. The goal here is to stitch in the crease that we just created with the iron. Just like the trim we did on the front, once we have that stitched into place, we're gonna fold it under and stitch in the ditch. Wow, look how beautiful that turned out. Great work! If you remember, we only stitched along the front of the hood, which means the lining is still loose along the bottom. You want to pin the outer hood fabric to the neckline of the cape, leaving the lining free so it can be folded under to create a clean edge. You also want to only sew through one side of the trim, leaving the inside half loose as well. If it sounds complicated, that's because I'm bad at explaining things. Since the inside of the trim is still loose, you're going to want to tuck the edge of the cape inside of the trim and then sort of fold under and fuss around with it until you get a nice clean edge, like this. Then pin down the lining to the cape, hiding the seam allowance, and get ready for some hand sewing. For this, you're just going to take a tiny needle and appropriate colored thread and run a whip stitch or felling stitch along the edge, sewing the lining into place.
I'm super happy with how it turned out. I feel like I end up saying that every video, which is probably a good thing. At least not every video is like, I'm super disappointed. I am really like over it though. But I'm glad I've taken the time to get this finished. I've taken the time to do it in a way that I'm proud and I'm happy and I can see my own growth. And I go upstairs, relax, chill out on the couch and finish this up and then reveal it to you all.
The last step was to attach the clasp, being sure to only sew through the top of the fabric and not go all the way through. I was a big fan of how decorative this one was because I thought it gave the cloak like an elven fantasy feel, and who doesn't love Lord of the Rings? Even though it was my birthday, I still needed something other than my birthday suit to wear under the cloak. The plan was to take 2 layers of fabric, roughly the length of my shoulder to floor measurement. Then once I figured out the neckline, I needed to measure my arms and mark out my arm length down the side of the fabric. Then, starting where the armhole should be, mark out lines creating the rest of the sleeve and the skirt. And hopefully there would be enough excess fabric to create a frilly trim around the bottom. And look, my diagram is only halfway out of frame. Great job. And look, I finally remembered to get some B-roll. Ooh, ah. The fabric I chose for the underdress was an old fitted sheet my mom was going to get rid of. I cut the elastic off of the sides, except for the top, hoping to use that for the neckline. I also cut open the corner seam so the fabric would lay flat. Once you've turned your bed sheet into a usable piece of fabric, you're going to want to grab a straight edge measuring tape and 1 orange fluffy cat. Mark your measurements onto the fabric and cut out the size you'll need, making sure the cat stays in close proximity for pets and general shenanigans. I marked out the diagonal lines to cut along to create the skirt and the sleeves. I used an off-shoulder top that I already had to sort of help me figure out where I needed the neckline and the armholes to be so it would fit appropriately.
So some adjustments I want to make to my original cutting that I just roughly pinned out on myself. Oh, literally where did all of the light go? Anyway, I went ahead and I rounded off the shoulder so I'm going to help the neckline sit a bit better. I'm going to add a seam here to the under bust to help the neckline come down where I want and have this all lay flat. And then, oh, I can't really show you. Just some like darts in the back to take out some of the excess fabric back there that I roughly pinned out on myself. But other than that, my original pattern I cut out fit and worked pretty well.
Next step is to just stitch around the outside of the dress. Now I will attempt some introspection for you folks and distill a lesson here. Basically, it breaks down to this. Stop underestimating the time it takes to do a project, especially to do it right. It's easy to say, oh, I could do that in a day, a week. But don't get frustrated if you can't live up to some timeline you set for yourself. Taking a long time probably just means you're learning and not taking the easy way out. If you think about it, time is a much more real assessment of worth than money. We all know money is fake. So if you're putting a lot of time into a project, what you're really doing is making an item of value, which is why plane tickets to visit my Animal Crossing island cost roughly $600.
Alright, I'm trying to remember where we last left off in our little story. Last time, our intrepid hero, I don't actually know what the word intrepid means. I'm gonna look that up. Fearless or adventurous, often used for rhetorical or humorous effect, which is exactly how I'm using it here. I took on the very fearless task of making an underdress out of a bedsheet. And then I said to myself, do you know what this bedsheet needs? Some tablecloth.
Using the dress as a template, I marked out on this red fabric the exact shape of the sleeve and then stitched it together. Because the sleeves were so long and open, I knew that they needed a lining. That way you wouldn't see any exposed seams and they would have an extra dramatic effect. Once all the seams were pressed, I pinned the sleeve and sleeve lining right sides together, and boy, was this fabric just absolutely miserable to work with. I mean, you just even looked at this red fabric and it just frayed everywhere. And even though I was only using it for part of the sleeve, it made me hate literally every second of it. Once I had it pinned together, I stitched along the outside of the edge and then flipped it inside out like a pillowcase. And this is what it looked like.
There's almost no point in filming in this lighting, but I wanted to show you guys what the sleeves look like now that they're done. Also, I went ahead and paired the underdress with the corset, and this plaid skirt I already had. I added some seasonal ribbon here to the waistband and just here to the side to hike up the skirt. I think I like how this looks. The idea, you know, is that I'm out at night, that I'm like fleeing, and I threw something on over my nightgown, and I'm taking off through the woods on this enchanted Christmas journey. I still have to hem the skirt, but we're pretty much there. I'm so excited to do a photo shoot in this dress that you can't really see in the dark. But that's cool, because it means there's still a reveal to come.
Next step is to hand gather the trim for the bottom. I find hand gathering instead of machine gathering is best for large areas like hems and waistbands. Here I'm using embroidery thread to make loose running stitches about 1 centimeter in length. I didn't bother with exact measurements, and eyeballing it seemed to work out just fine. Once that's done, bunch up your fabric to the size you need.
I've got the trim all pinned on to the bottom of the skirt now. It's still nice and full. I've got tons of ruffle. I actually pinned it to the inside of the skirt so that the seam is going to end up on the outside. I did that so I don't have to worry about an inside seam at all. That'll end up nice and clean. And then the outside seam will get covered up with a decorative ribbon. Alright, let's go sew this on.
For this step, just shove it in there, which is normally terrible advice. And I was worried my machine might get grumpy with how thick the ruffle was, but it did just fine. Now you can sort of adjust the spacing as you're going to make sure everything comes out even. Last step on this dress was to attach the decorative ribbon to hide the ruffle seam. You may remember me talking about this vintage ribbon in my bunny ears video. I recommend watching all my content to discover fun little Easter eggs just like that one. Speaking of fun, it's super important to put yourself behind schedule by spending a ton of time styling a terrible synthetic blunt front wig into something that resembles a bicycle helmet once you actually put it on your head. Now for the big reveal. All these light displays you see are installations by artist Meredith Connolly, who's local to the Charlotte area. They'll be available for viewing at the Whitewater Center until February, and I highly recommend you check them out. They are absolutely magical to witness in person.
Wow, wasn't that magical? Now it's time to wrap up this video. Wrap up like Christmas presents? Normally this is where I dissect how things went throughout the project, but honestly I'm just so pleased with this costume and so unwilling to acknowledge any flaws it might have that I figure I would just let it speak for itself today. Instead, here's a little story that did not get caught on camera, which may or may not be a good thing. So we get to the Whitewater Center where the lights display is, where we're going to shoot. And I'm thinking, we're going on a Monday. It's like, as soon as it opens, it just got dark. Like, surely people won't be able to, like, get over there by now if they're just getting off work. And, like, who goes and sees a light display on a Monday? Long story short, we get there, super crowded. Like, a whole line of cars to get in. There's hardly anywhere to park. So at this point, I'm, like, already freaking out. Like, I'm already doing my, like, pre-photo shoot standard freak out, but now there's a new, like, freak out on top of it. Because I hate crowds anyway, especially if I'm trying to do a photo shoot and I know I'm gonna stand out. And mix that with all the COVID stuff going on, I'm just like, no. I'm like, abandon ship, I don't want to be here, this is a bad idea, but I'm already in full costume, full makeup. We got the camera all packed up, there's like no turning around at this point. So I suck it up, and of course there's like a huge group of people in front of us going into the light trail, a huge group of people behind us. We let them all pass. There's like a clearing where there's not very many people around. I'm starting to like calm down, and there's this really pretty like glowing crystals like up this hill. I'm like, oh, that would be a great spot for like a couple of photos. Might as well like do this. But it's dark out, I'm wearing heels, I can hardly see what I'm doing. So I go to climb up this like little hill. It's only like a little 5 feet incline. And of course, it's just like covered in slick clay mud. So I try to climb this, get no traction, completely slip, rip my armpit of my dress, trying to catch myself, roll over onto my back, slide all the way down this incline, and get just like mud all over the back of my cape that I just finished. So it's the first thing that happens. I freak out, I calm down, I fall, I ruin the costume. And so I'm in this just like super fragile emotional state, trying to like deal with the fact that I still need to do this photo shoot. And I'm sitting up there and this group of people come by, just trying to be like super cute and nice and supportive. And they yelled at me, "Are you a good witch or a bad witch?" And I just look at them and I say, "I don't know, I'm undecided." So sorry to that group of people. Also, there's still nothing in here. I guess all that's left to do is sign off. As always, like, subscribe, comment. I'm honestly still undecided if I'm a good witch or a bad witch, so let me know in the comments which one you think I am. And notice I did say witch with a W for all of you out there wanting to be cheeky. To see more finished photos from this set, of course, follow me on Instagram at Vixen_, VICSIN. And until next time, happy holidays! Cheers! Ignatius?